Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. Today, really pleased to have three excellent guests to talk about a topic that is close to my heart for some reason. I'll explain all later. Requirements traceability, or just traceability generally, if you like. Let's start perhaps by doing some introductions. I wonder, Tracie, could we start with yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, John. I'm so happy to be here. I am Tracie Edwards. I am host of the Traceability podcast, which I think aligns with our topic today. I'm a business analysis professional and solutions architect. I'm located in Salt Lake City. So very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Tracie. And we will share the link as well to the
Wonderful.
podcast. So thank you very much, Tracie. And Yuliya, if I can ask you to introduce yourself as well, please.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Yuliya Tymoshenko, and I'm working at EPAM already almost for 10 years. And currently, I have position of senior business analyst manager and dealing with internal portfolio of projects. Basically, my heart is still with business analysis and more than 10 years of experience in this area.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Yuliya. Okay, and then over to Angus for introduction as well for you, please, Angus.
Hello, hi John. Good to be talking to you again. So I'm Angus King. I'm the principal business analyst for the customer marketing portfolio at Aviva. So looking after their digital and data portfolios. Been BAing in some form or shape for the last 15 years, and do a bit of moonlighting with BCS as an examiner and trainer as well.
Brilliant. And it feels like a good opportunity, a good organisation to be moonlighting for, one that Aviva won't mind at all. That's good. And I should welcome back Angus as well. He has been on one of these sessions before, though I believe it was before I turned it into a podcast. It was more of a one-to-one chat back then, I believe. Good. Well, great to have you all three of you on. Let's dive into the topic of traceability. And let's start with a question, firstly to you, Tracie, in terms of what is traceability and why is it important?
Traceability is it's about ensuring that you know where your requirements are coming from. It's ensuring that you're aligning with your business strategy and with the goals of other projects within the organization. Highly important because, as we know, requirements change, strategies change, business goals and objectives change. And so traceability is important to ensure that we're always staying aligned with the organizational goals.
That's great. Thank you. Excellent start, Tracie. Yuliya, just following on from Tracie's excellent start.
Yeah, for sure. I believe also traceability is important from perspective of reporting. Basically, some of our clients and even internal projects, they require these hard reporting standards when we are showing what we are implementing through which technology, teams, and products. So that's when basically traceability comes to help us. And the additional thing that we should think about when talking about traceability, that is regularity. For some domains, for some areas, traceability is mandatory and required by official documentation.
Absolutely. Angus, what would be your perspective on that same point?
Yeah, for me, I think it's all of those things, and it kind of acts as the backbone or the spine of your requirements management. Really, it's the thing that you need to have a plan for, and a way of describing it that everybody understands. So when something does change, you've got to bring something in, take something out, find out where this came from or where it went to. That it kind of makes all that hang together, makes that kind of cohesive and coherent view of what are you doing with your requirements. Answers that question.
That's right. Yeah, and that sort of bi-directional nature of traceability is really important, isn't it? To have a view, I guess, at two different perspectives. One is, are all the important things that the customers asked for or the stakeholders have asked for, have they actually been implemented? And then I guess the other side of that question as well is, well, actually the things we've introduced, we got clear traceability to the requirement, and has the requirement got relevant tests on it so we can ensure that functionality is not going to introduce some negative impacts or defects that we're not expecting to see, or that might have a negative impact on their system or customer. Brilliant. Well, I mean, you've all introduced the topic superbly well. I wonder, as a next question, this time I'll start with you first, Yuliya. How do you plan for and manage traceability on your projects or engagements?
Ideally, as early as possible, basically. You need to start with traceability at the very beginning of requirements management and planning how you would like to organize it. Because traceability, that is, as you told, that is bi-directional process, and you're showing to your stakeholders and clients how you implementing the requirements, business needs, how you're addressing all that. But also it helps to the development team to understand why they're doing some certain stuff and how that is traced back to business needs. So this brings also transparency. That means that you are starting with traceability from the very beginning of your project, or as early it is possible. When it comes to tools, you could start with simple Excel even, in case you don't have anything yet, but definitely my advice to start earlier.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting point, because I think a lot of time when we look at, well, I've looked at maybe requirement or business analysis materials, or even training that I've introduced myself, that traceability tends to be the module that you put at the end, because it's something that you prove that all of the analysis artifacts come together. But of course, in order to get that traceability happening in the right way and to have the right outcomes, you have to think of it as one of the very early activities that you do. So I couldn't agree more, in fact.
Yeah, otherwise it will be really time consuming.
That's right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually we may come to that later, but I could definitely say, as possibly you can as well, that if we try to retrofit traceability to our project or do it retrospectively, that is hugely tedious, fraught with danger. Far easier to do it in the right way, early as possible, as you said. Angus, what would be your perspective on that same question around how you plan and manage traceability?
Yeah, I completely agree. You need to be thinking of it very early doors when you're kind of talking about initial ways of working. How are we going to organise ourselves? How are we going to talk to each other? It's that kind of level of fundamental for me. And to Julia's point, if you don't do it and you try and then bolt it on at the end, you potentially have a model or a process of traceability which is actually pretty incompatible with the delivery vehicle that you've chosen. So whether you're doing something incremental or iterative or truly linear, you need to be thinking about how and when are we phasing and developing these requirements, and how's the traceability going to run in kind of lockstep with that. Because picking something that's appropriate for one type of delivery that you perhaps do more often with your client or in your organization, then trying to kind of mash that into whatever approach you've taken on that occasion. Again, like I say, it's just fraught with difficulties and risks. So early doors, and I think we'll probably come on to this as well, but talk to the people who care about it. It's like, we know we need to do traceability because our change framework says that we should, or we know that it's something that we should do. Who actually cares? Who's reading these reports? Who's going to come and audit us? Get those people around the table. Say, what should this look like? What do you need to get from this? Rather than us just producing something that's textbook. You can tailor it to the individual change initiative that you're working on.
That's right, and it's food for thought, Angus, really, on that side, in terms of when we think about our stakeholders, making sure that that if there is someone outside the typical stakeholders we need to speak to for the requirements or the analysis, if there is one that we have to engage, or many we have to engage for the traceability, that we also plan that as well at the start, as you say. Tracie, now what would be your view on that same point?
Well, for me, I think it starts with an attitude where we recognize that change will be happening. Projects never go straight forward as we hope they will. And so we need to recognize that the change is coming. We need to prepare for change. And traceability, as we're explaining it to our stakeholders, we need to help them understand that traceability is about resilience. It's about understanding how change happens. It's recognizing that change will be coming. It's recognizing that you need to prepare through traceability to ensure that your requirements always sort of remain aligned with the goals of the project and the overall business strategy.
And that point you made about informing other stakeholders and keeping people informed is really it's a point, I guess, that it's not necessarily obvious sometimes to call out, but it's really important, isn't it? Because by sharing that awareness of what traceability is and why it's important, you don't have to take all the responsibility as the BA to manage it entirely yourself. There are others in part in the process that could help in that overall approach. Then them having awareness as well helps.
Right, that's a terrific point.
That really, in terms of, I would typically also want to speak to not just my business stakeholders or my stakeholders I might engage with around the requirements, but actually those other parties that are going to be involved in implementation. So understanding how does the test manager want to work with me to make sure their tests can be traceable to the requirements? How does the architect lead? How does the development lead? How's the person going to implement this? How do all those groups that will have an interest in making sure that we can legitimately associate that piece of analysis to different artifacts, that they all have that view? And that might also influence the right tool that we use as well.
So true.
But you've also done a very good job answering the question, so there's no more I can add to that. So I'll
John,
move on to...
Yeah,
Sorry.
maybe I could add over here, as Tracie already mentioned, working with stakeholders, sometimes it could be really challenging to convince stakeholders from both sides, like internally our team or externally our clients, to basically have traceability. Sometimes they do not see the value. Why we need to have one more formal thing to track, to spend time on? We would like team to work, yeah? And it really needs your effort as business analysts to describe the value of traceability and to convince them to have it. And I believe here the advice could be not to overcomplicate traceability matrix by itself and really understand why you need this traceability matrix for this particular project. What will be the goals for team and for clients? Not to trace like everything, but just the key things that they will need to use in their daily work.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and perhaps with examples, it can sometimes bring that story to life a bit more as to why traceability is important. Because I guess it's a term that, unless you're familiar with change, you're not necessarily going to be familiar with that as a term. But it's easy for us to explain this in simple terms so that people can appreciate that if you don't have that linkage, we can't prove that what you've asked for has been delivered, and vice versa. I wonder, Angus, if I'll move on to a slightly different question, but related, of course, in terms of what techniques you use to ensure end-to-end traceability of requirements and or other analysis artifacts. Really.
Yeah, so that's something that we're working on at the moment. In terms of standardizing that, because there's been different tools and techniques used, traceability matrices, different things in different workflow tools, but we are now settling on actually this is a prescribed means of doing it. So we will be using a particular tool for a particular type of work. So if it's this, we're going to be using Jira. These are the things which need to be in place. These are the associations that we need to have in place, so that from a really kind of, so you don't overcomplicate it, but you actually do have confidence that all of these things have been built and they all have been tested and they do all tie back to these specific design items in your Confluence suite. So there is some kind of guidance on that now. I think it goes back to the point of, if you're working in a large organization or across a breadth of different clients, you're not necessarily going to have the sort of culture to rely on that this stuff's going to get done. You do need to prescribe. Maybe I'm working in a different context, or maybe I'm using a number of different third parties to do this delivery for me, and they actually kind of lay out, this is what I expect to see from traceability. So I think have some standards on it, and have some principles around, this is the level of detail that I need to evidence at this stage in the cycle. And to do that, obviously make sure that you're spending enough time up front, as we said before, defining what that is, properly kind of scoping and shaping your delivery into, whether that's phases of work streams, initiatives, features, epics, whatever it is. Just be deliberate with that and make sure that's compatible with the principles you've set out for, this is what I need to see at the end of it.
And I think as you're describing your response there, Angus, it's evident that techniques and tools, they're so closely aligned, I think, in this example, that it's definitely worth thinking about them together as you've done, in terms of, there might be some techniques we apply, but there's also tools that might be able to help. I know you've mentioned some JIRA related
and I'd like to be idealistic and say you don't need to do that and it's just the outcome and we should all be aligned and on the same page. But I think, come into contact with reality and just the variation and the different environments you're going to find yourself in change. I think you do need to have something to say it needs to be this, or if it's not this, you need to evidence that it's as good as this before we're going to, tick the box or say, yes, we're satisfied our traceability has been, fulfilled in this instance. Because, I think without that, certainly for me in a larger organisation, a regulated environment, the risk that you kind of invite by not doing that is often a bit unpalatable. Yeah.
I'm picking up on a point Tracie, I think, made earlier on in terms of, we're not trying to tie things together that are entirely stable, like requirements, development tests, all the things we're trying to link together have a life of their own and can move as well. So whatever approach we use, whatever tools we use, we have to sort of build in that adaptability to be able to flex as the artifacts that we're linking together flex as well. But as it was Tracie who pulled that point up, I should hand it to you, Tracie, to give your view on tools and techniques that you tend to use.
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember, and Angus alluded to this a little bit, that there will be multiple perspectives and there will be multiple layers where traceability has to occur. And for me, it's mostly about the stakeholder management techniques. So knowing who your stakeholders are at each layer and each perspective of the project and the objective. So I would ideally focus on the things that are going to get me in front of my various stakeholders of the different layers and levels and perspectives. That could, focus groups, interviews, all those kind of things that ensure that you're sort of capturing everyone who may have a stake in that and the level of traceability that they will need.
And I imagine on that, Tracie, as well, as you think about different perspectives, sometimes a way for us to identify a different perspective is to understand the associated process. And therefore, as an example, understand the different actors in that process who may have an opinion. So I feel like certainly process for me has always been one aspect that we have to prove the relationship between the process and the requirements. But you also touched on a really interesting point in terms of if we have gathered information about the process and the requirements for processes, we should also have a clear view of who we've spoken to in order to get that view. So there's an element of traceability in terms of stakeholders to the analysis we've done as well, which may not necessarily be in our matrix, but it might appear in our Tracie or some other technique that we use as well. Yuliya, what would be your view on tools and techniques that you tend to use?
I believe here it's important to mention that normally when we're thinking about traceability, we imagine in like traceability of our requirements to dev tasks, to test cases, and so on. But in real life, we also facing with traceability requirements, basically, because sometimes it is happening that we have, for example, results of pre-sale activities or discovery phase of the project, and we have some outcomes like high-level requirements. And then we need to trace them when implementing basically our solution to understand if everything was addressed and so on. And that will be part not only of stakeholder management, and Tracie mentioned, but also it could be part of project management or even like sometimes like budget management if everything that was agreed on and was result of discovery phase were implemented later or we postponed some parts. Also, it could be another way of traceability when we have already working application, for example, and some support requests and ideas coming. Then it will be traceability between those requirements and inputs to basically our requirement then to dev team and our development process. So it could have different ways how we are implementing traceability, and that will be definitely different techniques that we will be using for that one, and like templates.
Yeah, yeah, and then actually, and templates quite probably a very good point to pause on a little bit, because I think a lot of individuals, a lot of BAs that are watching this, they should be reassured that they don't have to go and reinvent all of these things we're talking about. There's probably templates in the environment already, the organisation they work in or the team they're in for traceability. There may be tools as well that they can use. I mean, when it comes to techniques and tools, myself, when I think about that, I guess, I know Yuliya, you mentioned earlier on, Excel be a tool that we use, which shouldn't be overlooked. It is available, although obviously it does complicate things if we're in a very complicated environment. But it's at least appreciating that is an option. I think as well, there's some simple things that we can introduce that help traceability. I think, having unique ways to identify the different artifacts that we work on, whether that's a process or a stakeholder or a requirement, taking a few of the examples. I'm sure the test team probably have a unique way to identify their tests, and developers have a unique way of identifying the codes and the unit that they develop as well. So I think that will certainly help that lineage between items. And there are tools out there as well that can help. I know Angus mentioned Jira, as one example, as well as Excel being mentioned. I think there's some really robust process tools or requirements and tools out there, such as Jammer and Enterprise Architect for Sparks, really quite heavy, I think, that you could do this in. I think most of us probably come across Jira as well. We'll probably use that a fair bit. But it's really just thinking extensively of what tools might be out there to use as well. And I'd also like to just urge BAs to think not just about the tool for traceability, i.e. the tool for connecting these artifacts, but also think about how we're going to report it and evidence it as well, because it's all very well having a complicated matrix or database to link things, but we need to be able to present it, firstly to ourselves to be comfortable where there's traceability and where there isn't, but also to the auditors or whoever else needs to be part of it. So it takes me on to another question, I think, then, as we feel like we've answered the tools and techniques question a little bit. So Yuliya, I can start with you first in terms of, what are some of the biggest challenges that BAs face related to traceability, and what's your advice for how they can overcome it?
Oh, I believe we have a lot of challenges over here. Maybe the first one could be the version control, when we need to support that one, really. And we need to be very careful with all those versions of our requirements and how we're linking them. And we need to think in advance how we will be doing that. Another challenge, we talked about that one, to convince everybody, stakeholders, team, that we need this. Basically, we could overcome this challenge with a team when we will be addressing our requirements in the way that we are showing how we are using this traceability. This requirement we implemented because we have this business need, or that is the request that came, and so on. And each time highlighting that one basically will help team also to adapt and to accept the need of traceability metrics. Another challenge that could appear, that is manual work. So when I mentioned Excel, that was like the very early stage in case we do not have anything. My advice to avoid Excel and any manual work that we need to repeat and then to support. Ideally to have some automation in our tools. It could be Jira, it could be like Jira plus Confluence, it could be Coda, it could be some other tools, definitely. But please organize everything in the way that you're just putting it, and then everything is done for you instead of you. And you do not need to have a lot of manual work to support really this traceability matrix.
In the door.
Yeah, it's excellent advice. We want to do as less as we can to tie this stuff together, rather than turn it into a day job as it could be if we were using Excel. Angus, what would be your perspective on in terms of challenges?
Yeah, so I think it is the discipline of maintaining whatever you've landed on as this is what we need to have in place for, you know, whether it's our workflow or our labels or an update to a matrix, the discipline, the priority of doing that, because as soon as that's not done, it loses all of its utility. And the point I'm going to make on the previous question is if you've got something that's, you know, very elaborate and links something up, but you can't actually use it, then it's not really giving you that traceability, because you don't, you know, when something changes or you need to identify it, you can't do it. So give yourself time to make sure that you've got utility from whatever you've landed on as a method. I think the other bit for me is around making sure that nothing's kind of gone native and is operating off on the side. So, you know, we talk about requirements, but those will often be linked to, you know, some technical, some design, some user experience, some UI design work, you know, maybe some copywriting. You know, there'll be lots of other stuff that needs to be packaged with those requirements. So we're probably drifting a bit into configuration management and less into pure traceability here, but I think they're linked, right? Yeah. Those things all need to be wrapped into, you know, this requirement then ties off and is associated with these things at this point in time, and this is who's seen them and this is who signed them off, because that kind of gives you that kind of confidence that you've got a set of stuff that's traveling together as a single stable thing. Apologies, my dog's getting a bit excited in the background.
Topic. Even the dogs want to get involved and Tracie, what would be your perspective on that same question around challenges?
Yeah, I think in the business analysis world that I have inhabited all of these years, a lot of it has to do with the collaborative work management and the communication. Who is your audience for the traceability kind of thing? You know, years ago, business analysts were producing enormous documents that nobody would read. And so I think a lot of that attitude still remains, especially in the days of Slack and Teams, Confluence, Jira, you know, so it's about who are you producing the requirements traceability for, who is the audience, what are the expectations, and are they expectations that the audience agrees to and will collaborate with you. And so for me, that seems to be the biggest challenge is how do you sort of cut through and get the feedback and the understanding that you need in the midst of an overabundance of communication methods and crazy schedules and that type of thing.
Yeah. And I think my perspective on this as well is that I think sometimes there's a perspective that traceability is something to leave till the end. It's quite difficult. There's a reluctance to do it. And yet, in practice, it's really easy if you do it in the right way at the right time. Because I think very rarely does a business analyst approach a bunch of stakeholders to gather their requirements without having a view beforehand of why they're doing it. Like they have a view of the scope of the project. They might have a view of the process. They might be talking about the process in order to bring up the requirements. So with that information readily to hand, why not just record it as you go? Record that a requirement has come in and that relates to 1, 2, or 3 of the scope items. Draw that link between maybe write your requirements over the process to which they relate, as an example. And it makes it a lot easier. It makes it sort of part of that sort of like quiet evolutionary conversation you're having. Whereas I think maybe it's a point Angus brought earlier, that if we don't do that, we actually wait right to the end, then trying to recount who you spoke to, what was the context, you almost run the risk of replaying every conversation again if you leave traceability till the end. Whereas you do it gradually, it almost becomes negligible, the effort involved. Just keep creating relationships between different IDs. It could come down to that little. So I think just a slightly different question now, we can. And I'll ask Tracie this question first in terms of what strategies you use to ensure traceability documentation remains audit ready, if you like, throughout the project lifecycle. So what I mean by that for anyone watching is really to ensure that if an auditor pops in, a regulator drops in, program management drops in, or even your central team responsible for compliance, they can get an immediate picture of how traceability and all the connections is shaping up.
Right. For me, I think what's important in those situations is a decision type table, a decision log, decision matrix for here was the decision in this situation at this time, and then going back to requirements maintenance, right? So you've got to have a way to, yes, I'm updating my requirements, but I'm also tracking why we're doing this, who made the decision, where it's going to live, and that type of thing. So for me, the decision log and decision tables are huge.
Absolutely. Yuliya, what would be your view on that same point?
I could agree definitely with Tracie, and I believe these kind of things should be part of definition of ready of our requirements, basically, that we are putting all those links. But also it is important to make sure the way how you're linking those requirements with decisions or with business needs or with other inputs from stakeholders, that is manageable and through lifetime, basically. Because sometimes we are just putting internal links, content over there is changing, and we do not have proper traceability anymore. The same how it could happen basically with some designs and other artifacts. We're just putting link to, I don't know, like Figma, the general one, and we don't have the proper traceability because that is changing through time. And then we don't know to which basically thing we linked our requirements. So that is also should be a mindset to understand why exactly we are doing traceability and doing it properly, not to have this proper linkage between things just right now, but that will be valid for future as well.
Yeah, really, really valid point, because the last thing we want is to do an excellent piece of work, tie everything together, and then things move around after we've looked at it and they no longer link. So yeah, really good advice. Now, Angus, your view.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more on that kind of, especially the Figma point. I think something we've taken to do is, to ensure you've got that transparency is you don't provide a link, you export it as an image, as something static, and say at this point in time this was packaged with these requirements and it's gone into this bit of the backlog to be built out. You encounter a change, that's then into a change request process, and you then got what you need to understand, okay, all these bits now need to be updated, we need to put a new version. And for me, that's where the value of this stuff comes from, because on a sunny day when nothing changes very much, you don't have to spend any more money or make any tough decisions. Case to argue, don't really need that, because you just get to the end and you're done. I'd like to be put on those projects, but I'm often not. And you do run into those kind of changes, and you do need to have really quick and ready access to, well, this is the thing, this is what we said it was. And like I say, decision logs, KDDs, change requests, which then feed into a new version of that stuff being issued. So again, it's down to discipline, giving people time to do it, and people understanding why it's important. And so, the point I mentioned earlier, bring those people, bring the people policing it into the conversation. So if you've got an internal audit team, a PMO, a first line, second line risk, a compliance team, a transformation team, whoever kind of cares about this stuff, bring them in to say, this, we're about to spend all this money and do this work. This is how we think it's going to look. If you come in, or your external counterparts come in, is this going to pass muster? Is this going to be up to scratch? Is this going to work for you in this context? Because I've found most people actually really want that engagement. They want to be brought in, they want to be kind of engaged, and they want to kind of share, well, this is how we see the world, this is what kind of good looks like to us. Yeah. You can then have the right conversations on what version of that you're going to run with. But I think better to do that than to wait for auditor coming in now, quick. Scramble for something. Yeah,
and I feel like it's important as well to feel like we can approach audit proactively rather than sort of wait with dread for them to approach and hope that what we put in place is fit for purpose. Knowing that we're on the front foot, and actually what we're doing around traceability is going to enable audit and other consumers to get that comfort. We can be quite transparent with them. We can go and speak to audit ourselves and find out what they need from us. Maybe there's some things they can share early on that can help us consider some of the other things that we need to do. And I do like the point you made as well, Angus, about not just planning for the best example, but also giving ourselves time. Probably takes us back to the point Yuliya made in terms of planning right from the start for traceability, but then also thinking about what can go wrong. The fact that processes change, requirements, etc., can move. Maybe even locations where some of these things are stored can change. And if we think about that, maybe we'll develop a versatile, adaptable model that can flex a little bit more, as well, I'd add. So I'm going to stick with you, Angus, on the last question, in terms of any valuable lessons that you've learned and you're able to share regarding traceability.
Yeah, I think we've probably touched on a lot of it. For me, it's about getting it defined up front as part of your kind of pre-discovery work. How am I gonna approach this? Making sure you've got the right level of stakeholder engagement for each of the artifacts you're producing and are going to link to each other, so that it's kind of clear that this person does need to be included in seeing this and does need to know when it changes. You can't be telling them after it has changed. Kind of back to your racy stuff. They're a consult, not an inform. And I think the last bit that kind of makes it easier is just around, if you've got something big and you need to break it up into its component parts, that you're doing that in a way which is deliberate and compatible with whatever method you've chosen to do traceability. So, if you're doing an end-to-end, are you doing steps in a process? Are you doing, phases in a user journey? Are you doing, different domains in a migration? Whatever it is that you've kind of set on, this is the top of the vertical traceability. These are the points that everything's then going to drill down from, because stakeholders will very quickly get around, okay, well, those are the things, those are the 5, 10, 30 things that we're doing. So those are the bits that I then recognize and what I need to see everything stacking up underneath. Yeah. If you're not doing that, then regardless of the detail you've got at the bottom, it all seems a bit kind of wobbly at the top, which isn't good for stakeholder confidence, I think.
And it actually is, just touch on a few number of the points there. I mean, number one resonates is recognizing that people are going to read this traceability or observe it. They're not all at the same level. Some people just need very high level view that you've got everything in hand and they can drill down to a low level of detail. Whereas some will be very focused on quite a subset perhaps of requirements or elements and try and prove that link as well. And I sort of like the point as well about making sure your traceability is somewhat digestible. So those groups don't feel like overwhelmed with information and data that you share in the traceability, because then you might be presenting a picture that's actually quite rosy, but if they can't see the wood for the trees, then you've probably got more work than you need to convince them that everything links together as it does. Tracie, how can you build on Angus's excellent points to share any of your valuable lessons?
I think as far as lessons learned or something with traceability, I'm sure we all have had examples of when we don't have traceability, when projects either go off the rails or you end up delivering something that was not within expectations. And so the importance of recognizing that, hey, we should have been better at our traceability and go back if we need to, or prepare in future to be better at it. Start where you are and ensure that you have the traceability going forward.
Excellent. And you?
I couldn't agree more with everything that was told already. Maybe one small thing that I could advise over here, that's to keep traceability up to date. And that means also for me that you need to have everything organized in tools, in proper tools where everything is automated, but also in the way that you do not need to put things twice or triple, even like worse. So you need to mark something just once, and then the whole tree is working for you. And then you could get any view that you need, as Angus told, for different levels of our stakeholders, team members. So you have it. You don't need to go through each and every artifact and put some label. You need to do it just once. Otherwise, it will be like nightmare to keep it up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the point I would add on top of that really is just, and sort of along the same lines, it's really just recognizing that traceability goes beyond requirements. It can mean many things. I mean, for those of us that might be working on prototypes or functional models, we have to prove the connection between the models and the elements and the requirements or the scope or the process, whatever it might be. So just having that open mind, and traceability really reflects all of the web of relationships as well, is something to think about. I think for me as well, thinking about traceability as a living document has been valuable, recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers up front, but you have to put yourself in a position whereas new objects get introduced, new concepts, new relationships, that we have a means to reflect them as well is quite important. And then of course the one we've touched on a few times, which feels like an appropriate place to end, is that the traceability is so much easier to do up front, and if you plan it appropriately, it becomes a relatively easy part of the BA process to manage and maintain, I would say. Certainly relatively easy if you compare it to the flip side, which is don't do it and then get asked to do it retrospectively, I would say. But brilliant. I mean, I think we've definitely explored traceability in many different ways, shared your perspectives, which I totally appreciate. Hopefully people watching this will get some benefit from hearing different perspectives on traceability. I'm sure they will. For anybody watching, I'd like to just thank you for watching this far. Capture some comments and share your insight if you would as well. Subscribe and like and all that good stuff is definitely worthwhile. And of course, look up Tracie, Angus, Yuliya, as well as appropriate, shall we say. But last things, I should probably just say thank you very much, everybody, for your time and sharing your insight. And I'll definitely look forward to the next conversation on business analysis, traceability, or similar. So thanks again.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.